Okay, we're going to watch something here that I found to be absolutely appalling in the fact that one of our politicians, and God only knows who paid him money to set him up towards doing this, but it's actually a disgrace towards our American politicians that would be willing to favor to the subject matter that they're fixing to talk about. Please listen.
Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is sharply criticizing murdered Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi in his new book, questioning his journalism credentials and the media's coverage of his brutal killing in Saudi Arabia. NBC News obtained a copy of the book entitled Never Give an Inch, Fighting for the America I Love. In it, Pompeo writes about Khashoggi, saying, quote, "He didn't deserve to die, but we need to be clear about who he was, and too many in the media were not." Pompeo mocked the media's portrayal of Khashoggi as a Saudi Arabian Bob Woodward who was martyred for bravely criticizing the Saudi royal family through his opinion articles in the Washington Post. Pompeo also described Khashoggi as an activist and tries to question his allegiances in the book, writing, quote, "And as even the New York Times reported, Khashoggi was cozy with the terrorist-supporting Muslim Brotherhood." In response, Khashoggi's widow told NBC News Jamal Khashoggi is not a part of the Muslim Brotherhood.
She also had some tough words, rightly, for the former CIA director who knew the intel and knew what the intel pointed to, and knows what he's saying right now is just a lie. He's trying to paint something as being black and white. It's not black and white. It was far more nuanced. And the fact that he decides, Gene Robinson, to go after a murdered Washington Post columnist who was a Virginia resident, lived in America, and who got tortured, sawed up, chopped into 1,000 little pieces, and buried.
Right. This. Well, not only did the Saudis do that, but also there's thousands of people in New York City that would be offended in this, in and of itself, of the fact that we know that the Saudis had everything to do with the attack of 9/11. That's what I'm saying. I just can't believe that somebody that's supposed to be running for president would have been willing to have sided with basically the Saudis in bringing disrespectful comments to this particular journalist that we know got brutally, mercilessly killed in the parliament, or whatever they call it over there in the Saudi Arabian thing over there that they dwell in. We know for a fact that occurred. And to think that our Congress would give them basically a green light in making them exempt towards being punished is another questionable remark towards why in the world would have they have done that, towards basically, and whenever they done that, it didn't just make them exempt from this particular man's life being taken, but it also made them exempt towards 9/11. That couldn't nobody go after them and arrest them and put them on trial pertaining to 9/11. Basically telling them that, and you know, I just don't understand the American laws, because it was the Bushes that favored to the Saudis, and it was the Bushes that knew that it was the Saudis that attacked those Twin Towers, and they diverted around the truth and went towards another group of people in trying to protect the Saudis. So there you go again, towards our own people being bought out, pertaining to somebody obviously must have given him a lot of money to get up there and say what he has said and put that on a book, in basically diminishing this man's reputation and this man's character. I've never, ever thought that I would have seen anything like this. But then again, it's very obvious that our government has been paid off by somebody, bought off, paid off. Whenever you have all the jobs basically go down south to the degree that our labor force here suffered tremendously, and you wonder how come the crime is up, you wonder how come the drug use is up, you wonder how come prosperity has went down. Well, it's because our politicians sold us out, sold us downstream to the degree that now we rely upon goods from other countries because we can get it cheaper than what we can do it here. In other words, I've said this before, America got the cart in front of the horse pertaining to labor issues in regards towards the American people paying somebody $60 an hour working for General Motors and putting on parts on an automobile, including all their benefits and their insurance and etc., 401k and stuff, versus somebody working in, let's say, Mexico, making only $12 an hour, doing the exact same job. Whenever you have such of an imbalance on a global scale, well, there's no doubt you can get the vehicle cheaper down in Mexico because the labor rate's cheaper. Just like TVs, just like any other thing that Walmart has basically put, or any other major industry has put in and on their shelves, they can ship it over here, supposedly, and sell it to the customer base cheaper than what we can manufacture it and put it on the shelf ourselves. We've been bought out on a international global scale, and our politicians know this.
This is
And it's got to do with NAFTA. A lot of it's got to do with NAFTA towards what Bill Clinton done. And when they talk about open trade, there's nothing wrong with open trade, but no one discussed anything about fair trade. And that was some of the issues that Donald Trump was complaining about whenever he was president, that obviously nobody took under consideration towards the unfairness of how that NAFTA has done. This man deserves better than this. Our people deserve better than this. The people that died, the victims of 9/11, deserve better than this. Please listen.
This is the guy that Mike Pompeo decides to criticize? I'm sorry, what's the word for it? Because sick keeps coming to mind.
It's totally sick, and he writes, well, I'm not blaming the victim, but let me blame the victim. Jamal Khashoggi was a respected journalist, known and liked and respected for his integrity and his talent and his connections and everything by every correspondent covering that region that I know, for many publications. I mean, he was certainly a journalist. He was certainly not a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, and the idea, even if he were, which he was not, that Pompeo would somehow defend what happened to him, and that's what Pompeo is doing. He's trying to say, well, it shouldn't have happened, but maybe it wasn't so bad because I don't like this guy. Just absolutely, that's I don't think a bad person does write something like that, right? I mean, this guy Pompeo. He actually served as Secretary of State of the United States, and this is the kind of person he is. It's unbelievable. And unbelievably offensive to people who knew and loved Jamal Khashoggi and people who respected his work.
People who knew him and loved him, worked with him, like you at the Washington Post. David Ignatius, the words that David Ignatius speaks about him are just so moving. But the thing is, Mika, that Pompeo was not only Secretary of State, he was CIA director.
Yeah.
He knew what the intel community found. Mm-hmm. He knew what the intel community concluded out of this. And so that's why this is so, not only is it sick, it's dishonest. He knows that what he's writing is not the truth.
A lot of questions, Caddy K, given the fact that he apparently is preparing reportedly a run for the presidency himself. You have to wonder who his audience, who is he appealing to here?
Yeah, I mean, there is something in the members of the former Trump administration that, defending Russia, defending Vladimir Putin, for example, over intelligence, Mike Pompeo now defending Saudi Arabia over intelligence. I understand the United States has strategic ties with Saudi Arabia, and Joe Biden visited Saudi Arabia and made quite a bit of criticism recently over oil production. I understand there are sensitivities there. It's not an easy relationship, but the way in which Mike Pompeo has gone after Jamal Khashoggi, I don't see what the audience is unless he feels there is some part of the Trump base that just likes the Saudis and likes Mohammed bin Salman so much that they don't want to criticize Saudi Arabia for the killing of Jamal Khashoggi. It just doesn't make sense, especially given what you were saying about the intelligence community and members of the intelligence community who did a lot of hard work trying to piece this story together. And in my understanding of it, my reporting conversations, they were not happy about, well, they were disgusted by what they found in the intelligence community. So I don't think Mike Pompeo is reflecting members of the U.S. intelligence community over this.
Coming up, we'll get the very latest from Northern California, where police have arrested a suspect in connection with yesterday's mass shooting, which came just hours after a separate massacre in that state. That's next on Morning Joe.
When you sign up for the MSNBC...
Another slain. Another massacre. When does it stop? Unbelievable. The monsters are coming out of the woodwork, ain't they? And that's what I continue to keep telling everybody.
Saving people from being deported.
That's what I keep trying to tell everybody, that we're under attack, a spiritual demonic attack.
Lemire and Mike Barnacle are back with us. And joining us for the fourth hour of Morning Joe is former White House press secretary, now MSNBC host, Jen Psaki. Good to have you along with us, Jen. We've got a lot to get to this hour, including the Academy Award nominations just announced moments ago. We're going to dig into who will or could bring home Oscar gold this year. Also ahead, a big story with implications on family food budgets. Egg prices have jumped 60% over the past year, but
if you can even find them.
If you can get them. One farm group says inflation is not the reason, actually. CNBC's Dom Chu will explain the accusations of collusion and price gouging going on. Plus, 4 Oath Keepers convicted of seditious conspiracy in the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. We're going to bring in our legal experts on the significance of the Justice Department notching another guilty verdict on an extremely rarely used charge. We're also following the former head of one of the FBI's counterintelligence offices indicted on charges of working for a Russian oligarch. We'll explain their connection. And California rocked by another mass shooting with 18 lives lost in a span of 48 hours. And that's where we will begin this hour. The new details on the shooting that devastated the Los Angeles area community as they celebrated the Lunar New Year. Joining us now live from Monterey Park, California, NBC News correspondent Steve Patterson. Steve?
Mika, good morning. And this community still in mourning after that horrific mass shooting on Saturday night that killed 11 people overnight. We did learn that one of the victims was released from the hospital, and we're learning a whole lot more about this 72-year-old suspected shooter, but police say still no motive yet.
A quiet Los Angeles suburb still reeling after a Lunar New Year celebration turned into a scene of terror. Exclusive video obtained by NBC showing the harrowing struggle for survival between the gunman and a heroic man who may have prevented even more deaths by wrestling away his weapon from a second ballroom.
I had the belief that I was gonna die, like my life was ending here. Then it dawned on me that this was the moment to disarm him. I could do something here.
Police say 72-year-old Hu Can Tran first entered the Star Ballroom Dance Studio in Monterey Park after 10 on Saturday night and opened fire.
42 rounds were fired by the suspect at that location.
10 people were killed that night, all in their 50s, 60s, and 70s.
I hear the noise, pop, 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 pop. So I just run.
Just 20 minutes after fleeing the first scene, police say the gunman arrived at a second ballroom in Alhambra, where 26-year-old Brandon Say was manning the front desk at the dance hall. Say managed to gain control of his weapon, and the attacker fled. Multiple law enforcement sources familiar with the investigation tell NBC News that while an exact motive remains elusive, the evidence so far points to a personal motive. About 80 miles east of Monterey Park, investigators searched Tran's home for more clues, finding hundreds of rounds of ammunition, a rifle, and materials for homemade firearm suppressors. Tran's ex-wife told CNN she met him at the Star Ballroom Dance Studio about 2 decades ago. She said he worked as a truck driver at the time and could be quick to anger. They divorced in 2006. Tran spent time volunteering at that studio and clashed with fellow instructors, according to Adam Hood, who once befriended him. Hood telling the New York Times he just didn't have friends there. Katya Vass, an instructor at the ballroom, says she's still in disbelief.
Everybody united to be happy, to enjoy, to be family, and then someone just come out of the blue and just destroy the whole thing.
A relative of 65-year-old victim May Nan, writing that she spent many years going to the dance studio. It was what she loved to do. Her warm smile and kindness were contagious.
Police say Tran has a limited criminal history, including a possession of an illegal firearms charge back in 1990. Look, it is clear at this point that they are focused on his personal connections to this area, but they cannot announce a motive at this point. I can tell you the community needs it in order to move forward. Mika?
NBC's Steve Patterson, thank you for your reporting on that. Meanwhile, there was another mass shooting in California yesterday. A man opened fire at 2 landscaping nurseries, killing 7 people in Half Moon Bay, just south of San Francisco. An 8th victim remains in the hospital with life-threatening injuries. The suspect, 67-year-old Chang Li Zhao, was taken into custody after officers found him in his car in the parking lot at a sheriff's substation. Police say a semi-automatic handgun was found in his car. Police believe the suspect worked at one of the 2 shooting sites, though a motive still remains unknown at this hour. Joining us now, California State Assembly member Mark Berman. His district includes Half Moon Bay. And Mark, thank you for joining us. Tell us what the community needs at this point.
Thank you for having me, Mika and Joe. And what the community needs is they need peace. There's shock and disbelief that something like this could happen in such an idyllic and tight-knit community like Half Moon Bay. But the community's strong, it's resilient, it's going to come together, and the state and I'm sure the federal government will provide them all the support that they need, and they'll get through this. But nobody should have to go through this, and this is happening far too often in California and in the country.
Mr. Berman, tell us a little bit about your community here. That for many Americans, they're probably waking up to this news today and learning about Half Moon Bay for the first time. Tell us what more we should know, so it's not just associated with this terrible tragedy.
Half Moon Bay is such a beautiful community. To be honest, it's one of the favorite parts of my district. It's maybe 30 miles south of San Francisco, less than 30 miles south of San Francisco. on the coast side. It's a place where a lot of tourists go to vacation and travel, but there's also a very strong agricultural community in and around Half Moon Bay, farmers that go back generations. And remarkably hardworking people, and sadly, that's where this tragedy happened. Was on some of the farms in and around Half Moon Bay.
Mark, in a little over 48 hours, California has suffered a total of 18 casualties, people dead from gunfire and 2 mass shootings. California has fairly substantial gun legislation on the books now. Can you think of anything else that might be added legislatively to help stop this sickness that is an American sickness?
It's a great question. Thanks for asking it. And I want to be clear about something, which is that California's gun laws save lives. And if you look at the national average in terms of gun deaths per capita in states, California on average saves 1,800 to 2,000 lives per year in comparison to the national average. But there's clearly more that we can do. And the sad reality is that as long as gun laws are not as strong as they need to be on the national level, people can still go out of state. We're surrounded by other states that have more lax gun laws than we do, and buy weapons there and bring them illegally into California. So we're going to continue looking to see. First, we need more information about exactly what happened in Half Moon Bay and in Monterey Park. But we will continue to look for ways and opportunities to make our communities safer. One area is making sure that the information that we put out, making sure that it's in multiple different languages. California is a big, bold, diverse state. That's part of our strength, but that also means that we need to be putting information out in multiple different languages to make sure that all of California residents can understand what the laws are and what the dangers are around gun safety, the dangers around gun ownership.
All right, California State Assemblyman Mark Berman, we thank you so much for being with us today, and know that we'll be thinking about you and your district, and we certainly will be offering up prayers for our victims and their families. So sorry for the loss there, but thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Joe.
All right, let's turn now to Washington, where 4 members of the Oath Keepers have been convicted.
Our deepest prayers does go to the victims of those that have suffered because of this gun violence. Not just recently, but all the gun violence. Which, to put it in the proper perspective, that was the primary purpose for my family putting up this memorial out here pertaining to the gross gun violence that's been going on now, that's turned into a free-for-all here in America, that now any and everything goes towards people basically picking up a gun and taking somebody's life, or possibly more than one person's life, pertaining to mass shootings. It is grotesque in thinking that America has slipped this far back towards no longer wanting to participate in a godly, righteous manner. And I truly believe that it was a stem off from these evil demonic spirits that it talks about in the Bible that will come down in great wrath because they know that their time is short, and they're basically lashing out in different areas in different ways, including forces of nature that basically the inhabitants here upon to the planet are being exposed to. And it's only going to get worse until we bond together in going up against the powers of evil. And the powers of evil begin with the Saudi Arabians pertaining to the Lucifer that has now entered into a body that has taken over that body and basically is Satan in the flesh, that I continue to keep telling people about, that obviously they either don't understand or they don't believe or they don't care, because you still have just as many satanic worshiping occults over here in America as what you've ever had. So until America gets, I guess, the worst type of a dose of what's coming down the pike pertaining to the sorrows that's going to fall upon to society. Until America gets enough of that, we're going to continue to see these things escalate and get worse and worse and worse. Which once more, I tried to help the American people by putting out an advisory in 2005 of a bloody road ahead. And that advisory was treated as a threat. That warning was treated as a threat from Homeland Security here in the state of Tennessee, from Secret Service. Keep in mind, it was Secret Service that didn't want the Windmill Ministries missions to grow, and they was the ones that had tainted the Windmill Ministries going all the way back into the early 90s. They was the ones that tried to, they didn't try, they did, bring up false accusations that I was some sort of an assassin on the way to Washington, D.C., in which I was on the way to Washington, D.C., but it wasn't to hurt or harm nobody. It was to expose the American people that the Bushes had went to war with Saddam Hussein and the indifferences going on over there in the Middle East of the wrong people. That was my primary purpose. It wasn't to harm or hurt nobody. Just like whenever God gave me the instructions towards putting out the message of major electrical disturbances in 2007 that so many people in western Kentucky, the spinoff from Land Between the Lakes, tried to make me out to be a homegrown terrorist. We're living in a time right now to where this system rewards you for doing bad and punishes you. This system punishes you for doing good and rewards you for doing bad. It's upside down. Or it is so biased to the point that they pick and choose towards who they're going to penalize and punish versus who they're not, to where one person or two people could do the exact same crime, and one person they're going to basically try to put on a cross towards crucifying them, and the other person barely gets a fine. Whenever you have a system that is disproportionately out of proportion, then you have a broken, corrupt system.
Conspiracy related to the extremist group's efforts to block certification of the 2020 presidential election. The four joined the group's founders, Stuart Rhodes, who was convicted in a separate trial last November, and being found guilty by a jury of plotting to keep then-President Donald Trump in power by force. At the same time, a third seditious conspiracy trial involving members of the Proud Boys, another extremist group charged with trying to disrupt the peaceful transfer of power, is ongoing in a Washington federal court. Let's bring in right now senior legal affairs reporter at Politico, Josh Gerstein, and State Attorney for Palm Beach County, Dave Ehrenberg. Josh, not so long ago, we were talking about how difficult it was to get these charges, to get these convictions. And yet we're seeing one defendant after another fall to the charges and being found guilty of seditious conspiracy. Talk about what this means, not only for other trials, but also for obviously what the DOJ's ultimate target may be, Donald Trump.
Well, Joe, I mean, I do think what we're seeing here is the Justice Department honing its technique. I guess you'd expect them to do that given the hundreds of cases that they've brought and the dozens of trials we've had. But if you just look at the batting average here in the Oath Keepers trials, in the first round you mentioned with Stuart Rhodes, the founder of the Oath Keepers, there were 5 defendants. 2 of them were convicted on this very serious charge of seditious conspiracy. So that's only about a 400 average there. And in this latest trial that just produced verdicts yesterday, all 4 defendants from the Oath Keepers were convicted, even though I think you could argue that, you know, the evidence of their leadership in the group was a little weaker than in that first trial, which had some of the premier members of the Oath Keepers. So, you know, Justice Department is learning how to present these cases, and every trial is different, but there's no question that they've produced a pretty strong record overall. And you're right, they may be using the outcomes of these cases to look at whether there should be some charges for President Donald Trump, a former president, I should say, although I tend to think, Joe, some of his more recent troubles probably more likely to get him in front of a jury than going back to this January 6th episode.
Hey, Dave Ehrenberg, we've been talking over the past several hours about these charges that have been brought and how the conspiracy to commit sedition against the United States has led to one conviction after another. The question is, how can you continue, if you're the DOJ, how do you justify convicting all these other people of taking part of a conspiracy for Donald Trump, inspired by Donald Trump, and the conspiracy accrues to the benefit of Donald Trump, without ultimately bringing charges against Donald Trump?
And the thing about it is, Donald Trump's done already said that if he runs, that once he runs for president, and if he wins, he's going to let all those people that wound up going to jail because of this, he's going to release them. Now, you can't tell me that our country ain't being torn apart, especially whenever we have politicians like Pompeo that's willing to write a book in the limelight towards wanting to destroy, or maybe not necessarily destroy in his eyes, but diminish a journalist, while at the same time basically uplifting the Saudi Arabians that, like I said, we know financed and had everything in the world to do with 9/11. Now, if that's not treason, I mean, just yesterday they found somebody working for the FBI that was taking a lot of money from the oligarchs in Russia. Where does it stop? You know what I'm saying? Where does it stop? That guy's almost at the brink of the law enforcement charging him for espionage. We don't know that he has committed espionage, but I mean, if you're working that close with the oligarchs and they're paying you lots of money, I'm pretty sure they're not giving you money for nothing. We are being attacked as an American structural system that has weakened and in some cases even broken our demeanor towards who we are and what we are. And I guarantee you, you may say, well, that was free time that Pompeo got this morning pertaining to his book. No, somebody has invested some money towards allowing him to get on this particular MSNBC program and them talk about his particular book. This stuff don't just pop up on news coincidentally. Somebody is behind it in some form or fashion towards supporting or maybe non-supporting, either way, towards making sure that they put a hit in, and that hit can be a good hit or it can be a bad hit towards putting their name and their ideology out there. We're being torn apart as American citizens. And people are going to see as this aggressively aggresses towards the Saudi Arabians being the very people that's going to hold the world hostage in raising the prices of oil while the rest of us suffer. And I've said this before and I'll say it again, as far as I'm concerned, what the oil, petroleum typhoon's done this past last year to not only the American people but the world, towards raising the prices up towards Exxon and Shell and Valve and all the other major oil typhoons out there making more profits this past last year than what they've ever made in their entire freaking industry lives, should all go to jail. They should be rounded up and go to jail. And the people that's in charge of OPEC, they don't deserve to go to jail. They deserve to go to hell, because they are the very ones that has been financing all the terrorist groups throughout the Middle East and other parts of the world all along. It wasn't just 9/11. Now, they've tried to shadow it in towards acting like that they're goody-goody two-shoes in the eyes of the international global world. But I guarantee you they are not. They are antichrists from the word go. And if you don't believe me, take a King James Version Bible over there and open it up in their country and start preaching the gospel out of it and see what happens to you.
Joe, Merrick Garland has the reputation of being a bottom-up prosecutor, where he starts with the low-level ones and then moves his way up. But people are waiting to see if they'll get to Donald Trump and the folks around him who helped plan January 6th. It hasn't happened yet. And I don't think that the verdict yesterday will probably have an impact on Trump's legal situation, because I do agree that the Department of Justice is more likely to charge Donald Trump on the Mar-a-Lago documents than for January 6th. And if he is charged for January 6th, I think it'll be for obstruction of an official proceeding and conspiracy to defraud the United States, and not for seditious conspiracy. I don't think the elements are present when it comes to Trump. But this was a risk for the Department of Justice to charge seditious conspiracy, and it paid off. And it could make Special Prosecutor Jack Smith more confident and emboldened to go forward on fourth down and charge the former president about January 6th. And one interesting tie between the defendants yesterday and Trump's inner circle is that one of the four Oath Keepers was in a separate group who was protecting Roger Stone on January 6th. Then he left to go to the Capitol to participate in the insurrection. So if it is true that Merrick Garland is this bottom-up prosecutor, then flipping a defendant who is now facing many years in prison with a direct tie to Roger Stone seems like a logical next step.
Jen Psaki, I know you have a question for Josh, but let's talk a little bit about Merrick Garland here. I see him getting hammered from the left. I see him getting hammered from the right. He's getting hammered from everybody for going too far or not going far enough. But if you look at his record, if you look at the DOJ's record of conviction over the past several months, it's pretty remarkable.
Yeah. Yeah, and as Josh said and outlined, they've clearly learned lessons as they've gone along. And if you look at their success in the number of convictions, that speaks to that. I think the thing about Merrick Garland is that he is immune to politics to the degree you can be. And that's the reason that Joe Biden picked him. And he even talked about this during the transition when he announced him. So yes, does it feel good if you're Merrick Garland every day to be hammered by people in the Democratic Party and people who are frustrated and want to see Donald Trump held accountable? Probably not, because he's a human being, but he has a strategy in mind here. Clearly, he is playing the long game for history. We don't know yet what the outcome will be, but I think, Joe, what we've seen at work over the past couple of months is all of the work done by the lawyers who work for his department.
And maybe she's right. Maybe he's going by the philosophy or the theory that if you give somebody enough rope, eventually they'll hang themselves. And we all know how Donald J. Trump wants to insert his mouth before he inserts his brain. I think that was one of the reasons why that he lost the election. No doubt Donald Trump done some good things during the time of his election, especially with our military and bringing a lot of stuff to the surfaces that should have been looked at. But Donald Trump has a tendency of being his worst enemy, in which most of us does. Most of us does. And what Donald Trump didn't realize whenever he was texting and tweeting almost every day and putting out his emotions and his feelings and his opinions, it's one thing for somebody like me to be streaming off of the news right now and me telling people what I think, how I think it pertaining to my opinion. But it's another thing if you got the big mic and now your audience out there is at least 30 million plus, to where any day, anything that comes out of your mouth is going to be analyzed, looked at, deciphered, scrutinized, judged, and in some cases even condemned pertaining to what you have said. Donald J. Trump never fully, I don't believe, understood the positioning that the people had allowed for him to get into and the damages that he could do just at the spur of a comment towards either starting something or stopping something. That's the reason why he has basically hung himself on the January 6th deal, was because the ordeal that set in play towards all the rioting, and who knows, it may even been some looting going on, but, tearing up government property and doing bodily harm to people and disrupting a procedure that is unlawful to disrupt pertaining to the way that our government functions. Donald Trump, for 3 consecutive hours, stood back and could have grabbed the big mic and said, you know what, this ain't working, we need to go home, y'all need to stop. And never did. And never did. He sat there in his little palace with all his little monitoring TV screens for all the major networks and watched it unfold right in front of his very eyes while his daughter and other people was begging him, Mr. President. Of course, at that time, he wasn't actual president. The voting had already done occurred. Mr. Vice President, or prior president, could you please get on the mic and tell everybody to settle down? And he never did. He never did. He sat there and entertained the moment during the moment. And if anything is going to hang Donald J. Trump because of January 6th, I personally believe it's going to be that. Now, there's no doubt if they're going to go after him pertaining to classified material being at his house, and we're not just talking about 10 or 12 or 15 classified documents, we're talking about boxes and boxes and boxes of material that he brought home with him like it was junk mail. And to hear him talk, or his administration, his prior administration talk, it wouldn't have been no different if you'd have rented out a book in the library and forgot to bring it back to the library to hear him talk. He puts what he done by taking all those secret documents to his home on the same classification as you would if you rented out a library book and didn't bring it back on time. That's how he perceives the importance of that in which what he had done. Or they're going to take the secret documents, the classified documents that they have found with Biden, and use that for a defense towards saying the pot can't call the kettle black because they caught Biden with a bunch of classified documents at his house. But in comparison, there is no comparison to the two cases. It was Joe Biden that volunteered towards making sure that he didn't have nothing in his domain that was considered unpermissible, especially with the archives. It was Donald Trump that was ordered with a warrant of handing over the material and didn't. And not only did they find material in one place with Donald Trump, but they found material in several different places. So who's to say who has read what, or who's to say who could use what against the American people, or who's to say that Donald Trump himself wasn't working with some other people, kind of like the FBI agent that recently got caught taking hundreds of thousands of dollars from a Russian oligarch on his watch while he was working for the FBI. Who's to say that Donald Trump wasn't getting some sort of kickback from the Russian people? Because we know for a fact that Donald Trump has a great deal of investments over in Russia and that he is a sympathizer to President Putin, even though President Putin has been killing innocent men, women, and children for the past 11 months pertaining to the Ukrainian war. And then, of course, if you'll take Pompeo, the guy that they talked about earlier that made the book that was basically diminishing the characterization of an American journalist, what the heck? Has suddenly all of our politicians started working for all these other different countries and taking kickbacks and money from all these other people? You wonder how come January 6th happened? There was a reason why January 6th happened, other than just Donald Trump ushering out to the American people that the election had been stolen. So many lives have been destroyed here in America. So many lies had been told to the American people coming from the White House for the past 25 or 30 years that I continue to keep talking about, beginning with the Reagans and the Bushes. So many people has been hurt, harmed, damaged, and in some cases even destroyed. You take an individual that was a sensible, halfway honest individual. No, they may not have went to church every day, and no, they may not have been a religious fanatic like I am. But you take a lot of those people that was working, paying their taxes, fulfilling their commitments with the banks towards having a house, towards having a car, towards having a wife and children and a dog and all the above, towards living the American dream, and all of a sudden jerk that out from underneath them to the point that now that same person is living on the streets, a homeless person. Or better than that, because of the surrounding circumstances, now they're in jail because they had to relate to doing things that ordinarily they never would have done, but because of the unforeseen circumstances, it created unintended consequences in their lives. You take one or two, maybe 100 or two, or maybe 1,000 or two people that has been done this way, it's not really such of a big deal. But whenever you have over 300 million people in America, and over a third of them has been done that way, which puts you now in the category of about 100 million people here in America that has been hoodooed, roughed up, lied to. Just like the people that dedicate themselves towards going to college and studying, remembering, because that's basically what education is all about. You got to remember what you've studied and what they've told you. That way you can pass the examination, right? You got to have a good memory, right? Everybody agrees with that, right? You got to basically mastermind it. You got to figure it out. All these people that dedicated not hours, not days, not weeks, not months, but some of them years. And now the system has been let down to the degree that because of the NAFTA deal that happened and other things that has occurred towards us being so downstream, these people had predominant degrees. They had educational skills towards going through the hula hoops, jumping over the hurdles, and doing what everybody was telling them to do. And if they done it, they was going to be rewarded by getting a decent job. That way they could have that house. That way they could have that car. That way they could have that dog and that family. And now the system has let them down. And now the very people that spent all that money and all that time being toiled with by the system, now the very same people that may have scholarships and degrees hanging on their walls are working for Burger King or McDonald's. Or maybe being a door greeter in a retail store like Walmart. Now, you can't tell me that we haven't been sold downstream, especially whenever the petroleum oil tycoons have done not the American people, but the world, like they have done the world towards basically throwing the world off into a state of freaking chaos. It was bad enough going through the COVID. But then, as we was trying to get out of COVID, here come the Ukrainian war with a madman over in Russia of slaughtering, literally just slaughtering innocent men, women, and children. And then if you'll compile that with what the OPEC oil industry, energy commodities done, you've got now a perfect storm. A perfect storm towards bringing disaster into people's lives. Now, you wonder about the January 6th deal 2 years ago that occurred pertaining to Donald Trump talking about the election being stolen. It wasn't just about the stolen election that Donald Trump was trying to promote as it being stolen, in which to this day, I still do not believe that the election was stolen, number one. But what motivated a great deal of those people in going up there and doing what they was doing is because if they themselves hadn't been hurt directly or indirectly, they knowed of somebody who had, and they had eyes for themselves, and they could see where the system was contaminated and it was letting the people down. And a lot of them, a great deal of them, actually thought that they was doing their patriotic thing in the unisys of the American people, kind of like Eric Snowden. Eric Snowden, I truly believe he wasn't deliberately wanting to go up against the CIA in exposing the type of equipment that now our own government can spy on us about. I truly believe that Eric Snowden was a patriot, and he felt like that he was doing the proper and right thing with the American people. I truly believe that. I may be wrong. I've been wrong about other things before, but I truly believe that that was his incentive. That was his motive. Just like,
So what all of this means?
just like,
is there anything if you're
just like a great deal of the people that wound up going to January the 6th, they had been motivated by seeing all the deceitfulness and all the hardship that had been falling into either their own lives or other people's lives that helped to motivate them towards going up to the Capitol and doing what they done.
Venue, if you did want to bring charges, or would it be better to do it in Florida? So there are a bunch of decisions like that. There's no question that Jack Smith's boss, Merrick Garland, is watching these trials. I was in his conference room for a press availability yesterday, and even though this verdict had come in just about an hour before, Garland went out of his way to thank the prosecutors and to note the severity of the verdict. One thing I do think that's interesting here is, these are not actually the cases where we see the most violence. This is the cases where we see the most planning, and I think ultimately that's the kind of charge you're going to see if there is one brought against Trump related to January 6th. It will have something to do with the planning, perhaps not just for the violence on January 6th, but as we were discussing earlier, the entire effort to obstruct the congressional vote. That's really the breadth of Jack Smith's investigation on this topic.
So Dave Harrenberg, while we're talking about different venues of possible legal peril for Donald Trump, one is Georgia. And we're going to hear probably just in a few hours about whether or not we're going to see the report. That report is made public in this case. What do you anticipate, whether we will or not? And then just give us your latest evaluation as to whether Trump will likely face a charge here. He's been Truth Social all morning trying to pre-butt that and claiming once again that it was a perfect call with the Secretary of State there when it seems clear it was anything but.
Yeah, when he's on Truth Social complaining about Georgia, he's worried about Georgia. I think the judge will probably release it, and then you'll see that the grand jury likely recommended charges against the former president. That'll put pressure on the local district attorney there, Fani Willis, my counterpart. And I think eventually she probably files the charges. I've always thought that she would be the second prosecutor to file charges, that she would defer to the top prosecutor in the United States, Merrick Garland, to be the one to be the first prosecutor ever to charge a former president. But time's wasted, and I think Fani Willis is ready to go. And if that document becomes public, like I think it will, I think there'll be a lot of pressure on her to seek the indictment. And Trump is very worried about it.
All right, State Attorney for Palm Beach County Dave Ehrenberg and Senior Legal Affairs Reporter at Politico, Josh Gerstein. Thank you guys both so much. Really appreciate it. And the former leader of FBI's New York Counterintelligence Office, who investigated Russian oligarchs, has been indicted on charges that he worked for one. Federal prosecutors...
this is the guy that I was talking about, working for the FBI. Listen.
And working for a Russian billionaire. They say he, while still working for the FBI, accepted hundreds of thousands of dollars from a foreign intelligence official. For more on this, let's bring in NBC News Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Delaney. And Ken, a lot of layers to this one, man. We throw it to you. Explain what in the world happened here.
Well, first, Joe, it's just a body blow to the FBI because Charlie McGonigal was a trusted career FBI agent for 2 decades who rose up the ranks and held one of the most sensitive jobs at the Bureau, head of the Counterintelligence Division in the New York City office. And in that capacity, his job was in part to protect the United States from malign foreign influence. But what these 2 cases, one brought in New York, one brought in D.C., what they add up to is that they're accusing him of profiting from malign foreign influence. First, while he was inside the FBI in this very senior job and supposedly investigating spies, they say he was taking $225,000 from a former member of the Albanian intelligence service and was helping him do business abroad, meeting with foreign nationals, all of which they say he concealed from the FBI, didn't disclose it. So the prosecutors say that was an illegal, hidden conflict of interest. Then he retires and goes to work for one of the most notorious Russian oligarchs, Oleg Deripaska, very close to Vladimir Putin, himself under indictment for violating sanctions. And what this indictment says is that Charlie McGonigal tried to help Deripaska, was investigating one of his rivals, was trying to help him evade sanctions. And so, look, Charlie McGonigal is pleading not guilty. He's been released on a $500,000 bond. His lawyer says he will fight the charges, but this is a dark day for the FBI. It's also worth noting that the FBI investigated this case and brought these charges, and FBI Director Christopher Wray issued a statement saying that this does not reflect the conduct of his agents, and it shows that they're going to pursue justice without fear or favor, even if it involves a former FBI agent. But a really, really disturbing case, Joe.
Yeah, Ken, the case is a real hit on the FBI. There's no doubt about that.
And so was...
Talk a bit about the thread of this case. Charlie McGonigal was in the New York FBI office for quite some time.
So was an FBI agent down in Memphis, Tennessee, that exposed a great deal of damage pertaining to the FBI. Once more, we're finding out, people are finding out about these hidden, buried skeletons that now are not what people thought that our judicial system was about, our justice system was about.
Was involved at all. As you know, there was when James Comey felt under pressure to disclose details about that laptop. Now we're going back into history. In the 2016 campaign, one of the things he was under pressure about was that they were worried about leaks coming out of the FBI office in New York from anti-Clinton agents who wanted that stuff out there. So no evidence that I know of that McGonigal was involved in that, but there's a lot of talk about that. And he was involved in making some decisions to approve some steps in the investigation of Carter Page. Remember that Trump aide who was the subject of a FISA warrant, which turned out to be not a good FISA warrant. Some other FBI officials committed misconduct in obtaining that FISA warrant. So he's been a player in and around these kinds of matters. What these indictments don't tell us, Mike and guys, is whether any counterintelligence cases, any sensitive matters were compromised by this alleged corruption. That's often the kind of thing they would leave out of the public filings, and it's something journalists are going to have to be looking into, because it's certainly the implication here. This is essentially what they're saying is a corrupt FBI agent on the take who was involved in some of the most sensitive matters at the Bureau involving foreign spies and domestic counterintelligence, and what, if anything, was compromised as a result of that.
So Ken, let's talk, because one of my pet peeves is when I read columns by opinion writers who recklessly throw out the term that conspiracy theorists throw out, quote, Russian hoax. We know that when Marco Rubio was running the Senate Intel Committee, that they actually said Donald Trump's 2016 presidential campaign and its contacts with Russia caused a direct threat to the United States of America. We know now that there was Russian influence that infiltrated the upper reaches of the FBI in the New York office. How disturbed should we be with how much the Russians have been able to infiltrate the United States government, and the fact that there's still mainstream people that keep talking about a, quote, Russian hoax, as if they didn't even read the second part of the Mueller report.
It's a great point, Joe, because they're using this McGonigal case, those people you're talking about, to discredit the Russia investigation because McGonigal played some small role in it, when actually, to your point, what it shows is how deeply the tentacles of Russian influence have reached into our government.
I don't understand this. Can you got a guy bought off by the Russians working on a Russia investigation that ends up deciding Trump doesn't have contacts with Russia? How stupid do these people think we are? He's on the take from the Russians, from a Russian oligarch, and he gives Trump the good housekeeping seal of approval that the FBI does, and they're somehow, I don't understand how they turned this against it. If anything, it undermines the FBI's conclusion that Donald Trump has a clean bill of health there, when again, even the Republican Senate Intel Committee said that wasn't the case.
Yeah, it's a fair point. Obviously there were many more FBI agents than Charlie McGonigal who were working on that whole Mueller matter, and they all looked as they turned over every rock, and they didn't find coordination. But to your point, a lot of people should go back and read that Senate Intelligence Committee report that you referenced, which, as you said, was written by Republicans and Democrats. Marco Rubio and Mark Warner agreed, and it was actually, in many ways, more damning of Donald Trump than the Mueller report. And it went into stuff that the Mueller report didn't get into. And it said clearly that the Trump campaign in 2016 posed a counterintelligence threat to the United States, and that those folks left themselves open to Russian influence, and they engaged in a series of improper contacts with Russian intelligence officers and Russian agents. That is in black and white. Anyone can read it. It's on the internet. It was endorsed by Republicans. Joe, you're making a great point there.
All right, NBC's Ken Delaney, and thank you very much for being on this morning. And coming up on Morning Joe, breaking news out of the entertainment world as the nominations for the 95th Academy Awards have just been announced. We'll have.
I am so.
You saw the Ukrainians take these quite dramatic steps.
Displeased about all this. I am so displeased about all this that it just makes my heart quiver, and it makes my stomach sick, because now it's revealing itself, it's unveiling itself to the American people in the world towards just exactly how badly that our American politics, various politicians, has taken advantage of their American citizens. And one thing that I can validate and say without a shadow of a doubt, no matter who I talk to, it doesn't matter if it's in a gas station, aisle 3 on Walmart, or in a retail store, or in a car lot, are in a mall, one thing I can validate is that no matter who I talk to, no one is pleased in the way that we have seen our American government officials perform. No one that I've talked to is pleased. Most people will tell you that they're fed up, they're sick of it, it's disgusting, and they are so emotionally distraught about it that it has actually caused some to fall off into a state of great depression. Do you have any idea who to thank for this? Beginning with the Reagans and the Bushes and the so-called churches that took a part in how that they was going to try to destroy or cover up or bamboozle not just themselves, but the American people, pertaining to how that the Reagans ever got the agreement towards ending the Cold War to begin with. So, in lots of different cases, whenever the performances of Mr. Putin speaks up on national TV by saying that the Western world had lied to him or lied to them because of the non-performances here in America, I can understand the reason why that they believe what they believe towards the Western world lying to them. It's as if the Western world talked about peace, talked about the Antichrist, talked about the false prophet, talked about the New World Order, talked about the One World Order, talked about the two witnesses, talked about biblical Bible prophecy, but wasn't nobody willing to pursue it. That's the case that I make as an individual that has went through the things that I have went through for the past 30 plus years, that I know for a fact a great deal of the people right here around in this area can validate themselves because they're still living. And if they got any truthfulness about them at all, and I'm talking about politicians, I'm talking about judges, I'm talking about mayors, I'm talking about governors, I'm talking about people associated either with politics directly or preachers and deacons and etc., that the individual that's talking to you right now in behind this camera that's being videoed has put forth more than just an E for effort. Where the conspiracy began in trying to shove off, destroy, eliminate biblical Bible prophecy was whenever 9 tapes went to the White House in 1988. That I can validate, that I got records to prove. Once more, it was the United States government and their so-called phony, corrupt corporate churches that wanted to put out this ideal about love and peace and love and peace and love and peace, which I'm not saying that everybody is guilty of this, but what I am saying is that they talked a good talk, but they didn't walk a good walk. And that's the reason why Mr. Putin over in Russia has said some of the things that he has said about the Western world towards the Western world lying to them. It wasn't so much that the Western world lied to them originally towards the concept of how that the Reagan finally figured out through the Holy Spirit in the aggressiveness of God towards ending of the Cold War, but it was all the things that was done and said afterwards that makes the people in Russia believe that they had gotten the short end of the stick. And I'm just afraid that if we continue to poke the bear over in Russia pertaining to what's going on in the Ukraine affairs that is now looked upon as being a direct Potsy war with all these other irregularities that's going on within our government, like the FBI getting caught, taking on money, etc. And it's just a matter of time before they can prove that he was actually exposing secret documents, records that would be classified as being espionage. Hopefully they won't. Hopefully he didn't. But I have a funny feeling that he probably did. But it's just a matter of time before we're going to tick off enough people over in Russia because of the spying techniques that has went on. Keep in mind what went on whenever Obama was president. Remember that they rounded up all those classified KGB Russian spy agencies and put them on an airplane and made them go home? The people over in Russia, I continue to keep saying this, they are not goat herders. They are not stupid people. They are very intelligent people. A matter of fact, whenever it comes to intel with the computer system and satellite and artificial intelligence and smartphone technology and etc., they're probably on top of their game just about as much as Korea or China or some of those other places over there in the Asian world. They're more up to beat on the computer software industry pertaining to artificial intelligence more so than the Western world. Now, I don't think that they would beat the Asians pertaining to the Koreans and China and Japanese, etc., towards their advancements in computer software. I don't think that they would beat them, but at the same time, they have beat us. They have beat us hands down towards using their capability in manipulating our system and spying on us from head to toe. And they're not stupid people in the sense that they can see how that the church world over here in America did not, I'm going to say that one more time, did not take the reins like they should have had whenever the 9 tapes went to the White House. And I basically had to go out here and pony up on my own towards being a one-man pony show, and never did. I repeat that one more time. Never did get nobody to solidly support the founder of the Windmill Ministries missions that I can validate through paperwork or CD form or SD form or legal document form of the things that I continue to keep talking about that obviously are continue to be ignored. So as I'm sitting here watching this fester, kind of like a pulsated sore, with the war, all the discussions with the spying agencies and the rip-offs and the payoffs, and now what's going on here with January the 6th and etc. What I'm looking at is the same thing that Winston Churchill looked at whenever he studied the American Civil War that happened after our Revolutionary War. And according to Winston Churchill, which was a mastermind whenever it come to military strategies, looked at the concepts towards the highs and the lows and the ins and the outs pertaining to the Civil War and said that it was an unpreventable event. I don't know if anybody understands that terminology or not, but whenever it's unpreventable, that means that it's going to occur regardless of how badly that you don't want it to occur or how much that you're opposed in it occurring, that it's still going to occur. And he basically categorized it as the perfect storm. That this come into play, that come into play, this occurred, that occurred, this happened, that happened. And because all the elements fell in line with each other, it was an unpreventable event. This is where I come in at. I hope to God that if this cannot be an impreventable event pertaining to seeing this unfold the way that I have a bad feeling towards it going to unfold, pertaining to it being a major calamity. And whenever I say a major calamity, I'm talking about a calamity that will fit under the same guidelines or the same category as being World War II or World War I or possibly both or even greater than the both of them, towards a calamity of people being upset, people feeling betrayed, people feeling stabbed in the back, people feeling like that this one done that one wrong, that one done this one wrong. That in the event of this unpreventable event not being able to be stopped towards a doomsday scenario, that no matter what happens in my life, I just pray to God that if I don't survive this for whatever reason, that maybe somebody will be able to take my material that I have been so diligently to put out, and that they will be able to tell my story after the sifting of the ashes, whenever the world finally unites and comes back together again. That I have tried and tried and tried to prevent the unpreventable. And you can basically take a lot of my material and look at it and analyze it, regardless whether it's Facebook or YouTube or even my personal material in and of itself, and analyze it. And you will see that pattern in my life beginning in 1983 towards me volunteering, towards me being the one to meet the Antichrist, the false prophet, or the at the time I thought it was the Antichrist. Now, since I've done a great deal of research and study on that, it's not going to be the Antichrist that I've already done met, but basically a form of the Antichrist, which is the Luciferian Lucifer in the flesh, which is Satan. I just pray to God that if I can't tell my story myself, after obviously what's fixing to come down the pike, that maybe somebody will think enough of me that they will help to tell my story for me if I'm not here to tell it myself, pertaining to who Dennis James Jackson, known as Juby, actually was. I don't know that I can put enough confidence in my son to do that. As of so far, I haven't seen him put forth a great deal of effort in wanting to support me or support the Windmill Ministries. He's acted like that he may possibly be a candidate towards that. This past last year, whenever he come to the house, and he only stayed about 15 or 20 minutes, but once more, he never did sit down and discuss it per detail about how he felt, or what he believed, or what he was willing to sacrifice pertaining to his belief. So because he wasn't willing to detail verbatim of actually saying, Dad, I was wrong, I should have been more engaged in the Windmill Ministries missions, even whenever we first went to New York and Washington, D.C., beginning on the first crusade in 1989, if he was to ever sit down and discuss these things with me as a practical person would especially a son to a father, maybe I would have more confidence in him. But as of right now, I don't have confidence that my son thinks enough of his own dad that if I was to drop dead before I get through making this video, and my son get a hold of this video, that my son thinks enough of me that he would actually make sure that he vindicated his dad in the way that so many people, especially local around here, has misrepresented me in trying to categorize me towards me being some sort of a monster. I would hope and pray that my son would do that. But as of right now, I don't have enough confidence in him that he would. And that really tears me apart by thinking that your own flesh and blood would turn upon to you like that, pertaining to you standing up for the Lord Jesus Christ and the biblical prophecies out of the Bible. But then again, I can look at my own life towards what has went on with my other people that said that they cared about me, regardless whether it was my other two brothers or my dad or my wife or my stepchildren or any of the above, pertaining to my so-called friends, how that they have forsaken me and abandoned me and stabbed me in the back too as well. All these preachers and teachers, all these different deacons, all these people that have known about my story, it's nothing unusual for me to go somewhere and somebody identify me. That's nothing unusual. Matter of fact, I bumped into somebody the other night coming out of Walmart, going into my automobile, and it was so dark I couldn't recognize who they was. But the woman immediately spoke up and said, "Hey, Juby, how you doing?" "Oh, doing just fine. You okay?" "Yeah." But I had no earthly idea who I was talking to because I couldn't see her face. I couldn't see his face. She was with, I guess, her husband or boyfriend or something, a man. And it's nothing unusual for me to meet people. Now, last night, I was in the refrigeration aisle, and I overheard a woman talking to her little, 7-year-old kid, little boy. "Oh, he's a liar." Like that. And that hurts too, because whenever I hear people mumble stuff like that, that hurts. But at the same time, I don't have a right to engage in her conversation with her son towards telling her, "What are you talking about? What are you explaining to him? Well, what's this about?" Because that's her business towards how she feels, obviously, I'm assuming, about me. Now, it may have been coincidental that maybe they was talking about something else, but usually God will tell me who I can trust and who I can't trust. Usually God will let me know who's for me and who's against me. And I'm going to say this for the record. I've got a lot of people. I got a lot of secret admirers towards people that love me, that pray for me, that like me. They like my concept. They like what I'm standing up for. They support me internally, pertaining to praying for me and being there for me on a metaphor type deal. But as far as those same people coming out openly and saying, "Well, we're going to support this individual," or "We love this individual because of what he stands for and what he's doing," they won't do that right now because they're too scared or frightened that if they do, they're going to receive the same type of persecution and the same type of animosity from their friends towards people turning on them the way that they've turned on me. That is how big and how strong that this is that's going on in my particular life right now. That's the reason why that I continue to keep making video after video and putting out my messages to my viewers, and which I don't have a whole lot of viewers. It ain't like that I got 2 or 3 million or 10 million or 20 million viewers like some of these other people with social media platform. But I truly believe that my message is strong enough that it's not so much how many people are listening to you, it's who is listening to you. And if you got the right people listening to you, you can still move mountains through the power of God. towards being with the minority and not necessarily the majority. And I just hope and pray that enough of my material will reach people like President Putin over in Russia to realize what has went on here, that it wasn't so much my fault or those with a sincere heart that this ministry did not grow and intensify the way that it did, but rather it was those around fault. The fault falls upon their feet. The only problem with that is that if they are pushed into a corner, and I've said this before, you can run a fox to his house or to his home, but ordinarily you can't run him from his home. If this thing gets down to the bare bones with the Russians scrapping with 4 or 5 other major countries, including America, in a Potsy type war struggle, I'm just afraid by pushing this in that direction could lead into something that could be catastrophic for a great deal of people's lives, and it turning into a nuclear event. I hope and pray to God that it don't. But at the same time, towards me being a spectator, by looking at both sides, I can look at the time that I have dedicated, the sacrifices that I've made towards putting out my message to the world, and how that I did not get participants to participate in standing with the founder of the Windmill Ministries. And I can also look towards being a spectator towards how that the Russians feel like that they have gotten the short end of the stick, towards being bamboozled, lied to. And between looking at both sides, I'm still, I'm still at the position where I've always been, beginning in the early 80s with the Antichrist, the false prophet, the two witnesses, the one world government, basically biblical Bible prophecies. But at the same time, I also realized that if this thing does wind up going into full mode towards destruction because of the way that it's playing out according to Winston Churchill, towards the perfect storm, I'm just afraid that there's going to be a whole lot of people, such as myself, that are innocent bystanders that are going to suffer tremendously, that are already suffering tremendously, but are going to suffer even more because of what didn't occur that should have occurred going back into the 80s, especially in 89, once the people locally around here realized that I was gung-ho and that I was very, very sincere in this message, and that I was putting forth so much effort in trying to get the message out, but yet no, instead of them supporting the message, they freaked out about the message to the degree that Homeland Security got involved towards making sure that they confiscated a material sword from the ministry towards trying to shut me up, drive me away, discourage me, even throwed me into a mental institution down in Bolivar, Tennessee in 1989, after that I was basically protesting towards what the Madison County authorities had done with Homeland Security, Secret Service. Now, I've had some prophecies told on me, rather than just witchcraft wishes, but I've had prophecies told on me, especially from the Native American people, that one day they'll come back and they'll try to make up for that in which what they have done to me, and that they will unify under the brand name of the Windmill Ministries missions. And they may do it. They may do it. But at my age and with my health deteriorating with diabetes, etc., in which I'm not dead, and I am managing diabetes the way I understand it pretty good, that doesn't mean that I'm going to be here to tell my story. And in case I'm not, regardless whether it be my son or one of his children or somebody that I have met, passionately going by that has heard about me or read about me or something, the only thing that I can do is pray to God, first of all, that this perfect storm does not blow up into something major. And if it does, the second thing is to pray that I'll be able to live through it. And if I don't, pray to God that my story will still be told, kind of like Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King's story actually didn't get told to the general public until after he was assassinated. And we have seen that again and again and again, that a lot of people's messages don't become as powerful or as strong. It don't develop into what that it developed into until after that person is dead and gone. And I'm just praying the same thing, that my message pertaining to how that I have been so earnestly passionate about getting my message out to the general public, that if I don't make it through the embers of the smoking whatever, that maybe somebody will care enough about my story that they will take it on, the initiative onto themselves towards making sure that I am liberated in the right, proper way towards how that these demonic, evil, wicked monsters have tried to make me out to be the monster. And the whole time, it wasn't the founder of the Windmill Ministries that was the monster. It was them. At this juncture in my life, towards seeing everything that's unfolding in American history as well as Russian history, the Ukrainian history, and the world's history towards what's going on in the Middle East with Iran, and the history towards what's going on over in China pertaining to COVID, and now with the deal with Japan and etc. And you got African history, you got Australian history, you got Canada history, you got Mexican history, you got all these different countries now that's coming into play, that maybe someday, one day, somebody will care enough about my story that they're willing to help produce it and put it out to the general public like it should be. Like it should have went 30 plus years ago whenever I first stood up in regards towards the 9 tapes going to the White House. This is where the core of origin began, towards America taking the left turn whenever it should have took the right. I continue to keep preaching that and telling that, and I'm going to continue to keep preaching that until the very last breath in my body. And I'm going to be so stern about it. I'm going to say exactly what my brother said in the incidents towards people trying to run him away from this neighborhood, from this community, because he wouldn't run me away. That my brother told me one night, Juby, the only way that they're going to get me off of this property is in a body bag. And that's exactly what happened to my brother, because of all the tension, all the stress, all the persecution, everything that was being brought up into his life, because I come back to this property. His peers, his so-called friends, the people that was using him, taking advantage of him, and the fact that the law in this county did not protect David Jeffrey Jackson pertaining to the judicial system in Weakley County, they will be held accountable for his early departure. That you can mark on a wall or put it on a stone. Because the type of abuses that I personally have went through towards going hither from one state to another in one area or another, that's one thing. But to think that we was basically targeted and hunted right here on our own property at 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255, or 430 Beech Grove Road, same address, that both properties connect together right here on a corner lot. To think that various people was entertained by sniggering and laughing and giggling and acting like that this was some sort of a damn three-ring circus horse and pony show out here. To think that these people didn't care enough about us to intervene and to stop what was going on, until finally my brother did die. And then they turned the tables and arrested me. And the only way that I could get out was to basically testify or admit to a charge that I never should have admitted to, towards stalking, even though it was 3 little children that my brother and I was concerned about between all the outlandish behaviors that was going on in this area. To think that those people done that in the form of entertainment, I will make sure that I follow them all the way to the hounds of hell to make sure that they will be thrown off into the very same flaming fire that Lucifer himself will be in. And I say that with compassion, and I say that with love. Not with hate, but with love. Because they know out of the 30 plus years that I've dedicated to this ministry, worn out 3 or 4 vehicles, spent in time and effort and losses well over $500,000, to think that they was willing to do that to us, knowing that we had such deep roots here, it goes beyond a travesty. That's the best that I could tell any law enforcement agency, either in Obion County or Weakley County or the state of Tennessee, the way that they banded me from all federal and state facilities, because I was out in Oklahoma investigating what was going on out there. It goes beyond a travesty towards how the Tennesseans in general has treated the family of the Jackson estate, or the Jackson saga, or whatever you want to call it, pertaining to what and who he was and what we stood for. Not only on a patriotic scale, but on a religious scale, pertaining to my grandmother and her mother and her father and my great-grandfather's father and mother, and what that they helped to achieve here in this particular area, towards what that they was willing to do and sacrifice for the community.
To clamp down on corruption.
Richard Engel, I thank you so very much. Good to see you. We'll be right back live from Monterey Park, California.
You wonder how come this country has went to hell in a handbasket towards the very thing that old man Bush basically laughed and sniggered about and made fun of, mocked the American people of, after the falling of one of their internationally known evangelists, Jimmy Swaggart. Well, that's why. You don't do like the American people done in regards towards the falling of a great minister like that, towards sniggering and giggling and making fun of that situation the way that the American people done, and think that there's not going to be dire consequences on account of it. What the elderly people done in the late 80s and early 90s, the adults, the baby boomers, are the very people that has brought this condemnation and indignation into all of our lives, not just here in America, but throughout the world. I continue to keep saying that. I'll continue to keep saying that. And I will continue to keep saying that until the very day I die. Just like my brother said, the only way that they're going to get me off of the property is in a body bag. Sometimes you got to draw a line and say, no matter what, no matter what,
are in the hot seat after the
no matter absolutely what, I will refuse to bow to the enemy. And to think that I have inserted so much fight towards fighting against my own people that was against peace and utopia and the things that the Bible talks about, even though a lot of that stuff that I talk about, I don't like to see the world being destroyed. I don't like to see condemnation, judgment fall up onto society that way. But you know what? I don't have a choice in the matter. And I learned to accept things for what things were. This isn't some sort of an election where we can vote in and out the things that we either don't want or we do want. I wish that biblical Bible prophecy was that way, but I know that it's not. And there's no need for me to try to convince myself that I got any kind of say-so pertaining to history or pertaining to God's will, because what has already been written in stone, it's going to happen regardless whether I want it to or not. That's the part that I could not obviously get across to going back 30 plus years ago by putting out my message, that people obviously thought
we see a better way.
They obviously thought that I was doing this of my own accord, and what they didn't take under consideration, that I was being driven. I was being asked. I was being influenced. It was a calling. And in that calling, I have learned to be more submissive. Now, there's been times that I've run. Oh, God, there's been times that I have run and run and run from my convictions. And I thought to myself, kind of like Jonah, there's no way that I'm going to do anything like that. There's no way that I'm going to participate in anything like that. But you know what? Whenever God has put a blessing or an anointing on your life towards you doing a certain particular task with Him and for Him, a lot of times it's not what we're looking at, but how that we're looking at it. And in reality, I should feel honored, grateful that the Almighty God thought enough of Dennis James Jackson, known as Juby, to call him into the ministry towards being a tool for God. I shouldn't be frightened. I shouldn't be opposed. I shouldn't be pouting like a little child sitting somewhere that didn't get his way. I should be grateful. And I have learned to accept that throughout the years, because I have seen God protect me, and protect me again and again and again towards bringing me through the trials and the tribulations that I had to face because of the Lucifer, the wicked, demonic, evil spirits that are working through all these people that has brought this condemnation not only now into my life, but into theirs too as well. So yes, am I grateful and thankful for my Heavenly Father and the Lord Jesus Christ? 100%. And to be quite honest with you, the things that I have went through, as harsh as what they was, that pain, one day, the tears, the agony, the trials, the letdowns will all turn to joy. And I know this. And because I know this, makes it all worthwhile, makes it all worthy in His name towards being able to stand or sit and make these videos and still promote my message and tell people about my testimony. Regardless of what the end results may be. Just as Job said whenever his wife told him, "Why don't you curse God and die?" And Job responded back to his wife and say, "Though worms may devour my body, I will not curse my God." And once the satanic forces realized how dedicated that Job was, and that they was not going to be able to whip Job, they was not going to be able to overcome Job in his faith with God, they abandoned him. They forsaken him, and they left him alone. And then God started blessing Job, and God started blessing Job, and you know what? Job, towards the end, wound up being 7 times more stronger, 7 times more richer, 7 times more blessed than what he ever was before the trial ever come his way. And I just pray to God that I have that same faith as Job, that I'll be able to relentlessly go through whatever else that may come my way, because I know that all of it would be worth it in the end. But that's the key point. You got to be willing to go to the end. For the Bible says that he who shall overcometh and keepeth my works to the end, the same shall be saved. For we do not have to worry about going through that second death or that trial to that second death, because our names is written in the Lamb's Book of Life. And no matter if worms does devour our bodies, as long as we keep the faith, our soul will be spared. And according to the Bible, if a man gains the whole world and loses his soul, he still is a very, very wretched, worthless human being. So of all cost, perfect storm, corruption, lies, deceit, whatever, the best that any of us can hope for is that he who shall endureth unto the end shall be saved. Now, that doesn't mean that your flesh is going to be saved, but what it does mean is that your soul, your eternal spiritual soul, will be saved. That's the reason why the Bible talks about that Satan will throw some of us into prison. Be thou faithful unto death. This is going to occur. That's going to occur. It talks about these things very, very plainly in the Bible towards how that the true Christians are going to be persecuted. And one of the main reasons why I think that the Christians are being persecuted right now is because they're not willing to stick together. They're not willing to bond. They're not willing to conform. They're not willing to unify. We have to learn to utilize our strengths to overcome our weaknesses. And if we don't, it's just as the theory of the chain being only as strong as its weakest link, we will never have that strong chain if we don't utilize our strengths to overcome our weaknesses.
This afternoon, President Biden is set to huddle with Democrats as Republicans on Capitol Hill intensify the pressure surrounding his handling of classified documents. The White House counsel's office has now signaled that it plans to cooperate with recent requests from both the House Oversight and Judiciary Committees, but only to an extent. The Secret Service also says it is reviewing a separate request from some congressional Republicans for visitor records from locations where classified records have been found. NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba is at the White House, and our senior Capitol Hill correspondent Garrett Hake is at his post. Garrett, the White House counsel says it's willing to cooperate with these House investigations, but also suggested that there are limits. What are those limits?
Yeah, cooperation to a point. These letters to the Oversight Committee and to the Judiciary Committee are something of a stalling tactic. Remember, when they were in the minority, House Republicans sent a bunch of requests to the White House on several different oversight issues over the course of the last year. In early January, the White House responded and said, that's nice. We're not going to follow through on any of that stuff. You got to resubmit it now that you're in the majority. So those committees resubmitted their requests. Now the White House responds with another letter that says in part that they'll respond to what they consider to be legitimate oversight, and that they'll take into account the prerogatives of the executive branch and the White House, which is a long way of saying that they're still going to hold back some material, either on probes that they think are either too personal or don't necessarily go into what they consider to be legitimate, or perhaps into ongoing investigations being conducted by the Department of Justice. That's going to really frustrate some of these House Republicans. They believe it's not up to the White House to decide what oversight is legitimate. It's up to them in Congress to decide the oversight that they want to engage in. So I suspect this is going to be really just the beginning of a potentially lengthy back and forth between the White House and these two committees to get the documents they want and ultimately the testimony they're going to ask for from White House and DOJ officials.
Monica, let's turn to that Secret Service request. What exactly do these congressional Republicans want to see, and what is the agency saying?
And this is something we saw come in a letter at the beginning of last week with those House Republicans wanting any kind of what they called visitor logs of anyone who came into contact with the president at his Wilmington, Delaware home. And what we learned very quickly is that the White House doesn't maintain those, and neither does the Secret Service in any detailed or long form way, because it is a personal home for Joe Biden. And that is the case of his Rehoboth Beach home and anywhere else where typically presidents have their private homes, of course, outside of the White House. And that is not out of the norm for presidents dating back decades. So what's unique here is that now we are also seeing some Senate Republicans asking for this same information. And what the Secret Service has been very clear to say is that, again, we screen potential people who come to these properties in terms of a background check. We run their names, the date of birth, any kind of basic information to make sure they can come and visit with the president and the first family. But we don't retain that kind of information. So there aren't logs that they can hand over. That said, the Secret Service is responding to the House Republicans specifically saying we are reviewing your request for this information, and if there is something that we can perhaps provide, we may be able to do that. But again, this is going to be a lengthy process, and the Secret Service very clear to say we would like to cooperate with this, but we just don't have exactly what you're asking for in terms of these detailed records. Are there names potentially of people who visit often that maybe they could potentially hand over? Yes, but not with any kind of log of when and how often. At least that's how we understand it at this point, Lindsay.
Well, let's listen to what Attorney General Merrick Garland said about both the investigations into President Biden and former President Trump.
The role of the Justice Department is to apply the facts and the law in each case and to reach appropriate decisions in a nonpartisan and neutral way without regard to who the subjects are. That is what we've done in each of these cases, and that is what we'll continue to do.
Pretty unusual here to hear from Merrick Garland about this, but this is a tightrope that they're essentially walking, and he is trying to show that they are operating completely independently from the White House, Monica.
Which is the exact messaging of the White House, Lindsay, and that has been a key point from the top senior officials we've heard from in the last couple of days. There's not much they can share, they say, except to say we are cooperating fully with the Department of Justice. And that is really a strategy here because they want to try to, they say, make a distinction between what the current sitting president is doing under a special counsel investigation when it comes to classified documents and his predecessor. When you look at former President Trump and the fact that even when the National Archives asked for months to hand over the documents, many of them classified records kept at Mar-a-Lago after he left office, he didn't cooperate. So this White House is saying, look, when we found these initially at the Penn Biden Center here in Washington, D.C., we did the right thing. And so that is what you're going to continue to see and hear from the president, from his press secretary. Again, they can't go into much more detail, they say, because of the ongoing probe, but it's clear they want to say that this White House is able to act completely independently of the Department of Justice. That's something candidate Biden ran on, and that's something the president now says he's proud is true, even when it comes so close to now his own investigation here. Lindsay.
Garrett, I want to talk about the new Congress. We've just learned a new development in the drama surrounding this effort to block Democrats from some committees. What can you tell us?
Yeah, this is a statement from Victoria Spartz, who caught people's attention during the speaker fight for voting present on many of those ballots before ultimately casting her lot with Kevin McCarthy. She's out with a statement saying that she doesn't want to take part in what she calls the bread and circuses form of governing that would force Ilhan Omar off the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Now, remember, this goes back to the last Congress when Democrats booted, or rather bipartisan votes, booted a couple of Republican lawmakers off of their committees. Republicans had vowed to retaliate. Speaker McCarthy has said he can and intends to unilaterally remove Adam Schiff and Eric Swalwell from the House Select Committee on Intelligence, but he was going to have to go to a floor vote to remove Ilhan Omar from the Foreign Affairs Committee. He had intended to do that, but now we're up to 2 House Republicans who said they won't support that. Spartz joins Nancy Mace, who made a similar comment over the weekend. As we learned in that speaker's fight, with a narrow majority like this, McCarthy needs basically every Republican vote to move something even as theoretically simple as something like this, which he made a big point to run on. It's not clear that he's going to want to spend the political capital on a floor fight to kick a Democrat off a committee for something she said a couple of years ago. So where this goes from here, stay tuned, Lindsay, but an interesting development.
Okay, Monica, Alba, Garrett, hey, thank you.
We're going to end this right here pertaining to all this morning. I just hope and pray that whoever does get a hold of this, that it won't be so upsetting to them that they'll be able to deal with this appropriately pertaining to all the information that's been shed up onto this particular video. We want to say thank you for your prayers. God bless you. We love you in the Lord. We want to say good luck to each and every one of us, especially those who are reaching out for the righteousness of the blessings of the eternal God. We want to say good luck, and God bless America. God bless our troops. God bless our endeavors towards where we go from here, because obviously we're dealing with repercussions of these evil, demonic, wicked spirits that are out to kill, steal, and destroy, that they have caused so much disruption in the American people and the world's lives in general. We want to say God bless and shalom.